Okay, now let's test the equals method. All right, we're going to get serious here. Okay, we don't have that anywhere. We've tested our constructors. Things are a little bit out of order in our test cases, I just noticed, because we put our accessors before toString and hash code. So actually, I'm just going to move that to make everything kind of consistent. Enum sex, that doesn't matter where that test is at. But I want to put these accessors after the constructor, the same place they are, and the class under test. Okay, so we've done toString, we've done hash code, and now we're going to test equals. Let's take a look at the equals methods and see exactly what we have to test here. Okay, so look at all these conditions here. Let me just run ECL Emma on this. Let me just run the coverage on this. Okay, so nothing is tested in here. But look at these conditions. The conditions are the things we're going to have to worry about. All two branches missed, all two branches missed, all two branches missed, etc., etc. So we need to get true and false for each of these branches. Okay, so if this equals object, so we're going to have a test where Fred equals Fred, and that's true. And then we're going to have a test where Fred does not equal Fred. And that's going to return false. So some of these we can get with just a couple tests. We'll get a lot of our branches, because if you fall through till here, then you've got, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 if conditions. So basically that means there's 14 branches in here, 7 simple if conditions. So that means there's 14 branches in total. So presumably we can get 7 of them if we fall through to here. So if we return true, if two objects are equal without being the same object, we should be able to get, to get 7 branches. So let's see if we can actually do that. Okay, we want to get to here. All right, and the only way to get to there is if two objects are equal without being the exact same object. So what does that look like? Well, we actually just did that in hash code. Okay, we asserted that Fred was equal to, hash code of Fred was equal to Fred2. And in fact, Fred should be equals to Fred2. Okay, so we're going to use the same thing for the equals method. So let's do that. Test public void test hash code. Test equals, and I'm going to say Fred. I'm just going to say Fred2, and hopefully I'll know what I mean by that. Maybe I'll put in Fred EQ Fred2. All right. So I'm going to create Fred2 there. And then I'm going to assert equals Fred and Fred2. Now, when I do that assert equals, that's automatically going to use the equals method that you've created for persons. If there's two persons in here, this is going to automatically use the equals method. So by default, we don't have to say assert true Fred equals. Actually, let me just do that. We could say this is the exact same thing, essentially. Fred, whoops, and I'm going to hit Control space that. Fred equals Fred2. These should give us the exact same results. I'm going to comment out one. And I'm just going to jump into the coverage here because I'm pretty sure that should pass. Okay, it passes. And then when I look at the coverage, look at that. 1 of 2 branches covered for all of these. We had 0 of 2 branches. That's because we hit this return true. Okay, so we just got rid of 7 branches with 1 test. All right, so this other test, if it's the same thing, it should also get rid of those 7 branches. So let's go ahead and run that again. And there it is. So it's the same thing here. All right, so when testing equals, all you need is the assert equals. That is going to test the equals method. So I'm going to get rid of that one. And let's test. All right, let's do this kind of systematically here. We want to test that Fred is equal, or we want to test that a person is equal to the same object on the heap. So this will work if Fred equals Fred. Okay, this one should be exercised if Fred equals Fred. And for this one, we want to test if Fred equals a null object. Okay, so we want to say assert equals Fred, comma, null. This one we want to say assert equals Fred, comma, Fred. And this one here, we're testing if a person object is equal to a non-person object, which is going to return false. So this one we want to say like something like, Fred equals a new string, hello, or something ridiculous like that. And that will exercise that branch. And then we'll worry about the other branches after we do that. So I'm going to do public void test equals Fred Okay, I'll just keep using EQ. Actually, I'm going to get rid of that EQ. That just bugs me for some reason. So I'm just going to do Fred. Test equals Fred. So here, assert equals Fred. And then we run coverage on that. That should bump up our coverage a little bit. And you can see that this one has now turned green. Okay, all 2 branches covered. So this one we're going to do Fred, comma, null. And this one we're going to do Fred, comma, compared to a string or something like that. All right, so test public void test equals Fred null. assert equals Fred null. Test public void test equals Fred hello. Okay, so we're going to compare Fred to a string object. And I can already see a mistake here. The mistake is, let's see, Fred should equal Fred. That's a good thing. But Fred should obviously not equal null. So that should be not equals. And Fred should not equal hello. So that should be not equals. All right, let's run those two tests. Let's just run the coverage right away. Everything passes. And now we've taken care of all of these branches. Fantastic. We are moving right along. Now we have to worry about these. We have to say if the names of the persons aren't equal, return false. Well, we have an easy one for that. We have Jane for that one. Okay, the names are not equal in Jane. Okay, so I'm going to create a new test. Public void test equals Fred Jane. Assert not equals Fred Jane. All right. And let's look at the code coverage on that and make sure we got the rest of that statement. Yep, we got it. Okay, so line 121 is now green. Now, to get to line 122, the two persons have to be not equal because of their birthdays. Okay, so their names have to be equal, but their birthdays are not equal. All right, so we have to have another Fred in here because the names have to be equal. So here's what I'm going to do for that. And unfortunately, I already used Fred 2 for that. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Okay, Fred and Jane are not equal. I'm going to call this test equals birthdays not equal. Okay, so the names are going to be equal, but the birthdays aren't going to be equal. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make another person called Fred2, and I'm actually going to go way up here, and I'm going to grab Jane's constructor, copy that, all right, and there's Fred2, and I'm going to paste that. And instead of naming Jane, I'm going to name Jane Fred. Okay, so Jane becomes Fred2, but Fred is Fred, and Fred has a different birthday. Okay. Fred also happens to be a female, and Fred's email address is jane@example.com, but I'm not going to worry about that. The only two fields I'm worried about is Fred and the birthday. Okay. So Fred 2. All right, so I want to assert not equals Fred and Fred 2. All right, I'm going to go to my coverage. I'm going to go to person, and 122 is now covered completely. All right, so looks like this is going in a good direction. I'm just going to copy this. Now I want the birthdays to be equal also. So I'm going to say test equals gender not equal. Okay, so I have to get Fred's birthday. Here it is. Up here. And make Fred's birthday equal. Okay, so now this should fail because the genders are not equal. So Fred and Fred 2 have the same name and birthday, different genders and different email address, but the email address really doesn't matter, okay, because it's never going to get there. Okay, and now actually before I even run this again, I'm just going to do the email addresses. Paste. Okay, email not equal. So now Fred 2 is a male again, but Fred 2 still has the email address jane@example.com. All right, so let's run this with coverage. All my tests pass. And look at that. The entire equals method is now covered. If we drill down here, person, source, person, person, and we look at the equals method, 100% coverage for the equals method. Fantastic. And in fact, the only method not covered here is the compare to method.